So I'm going to chat some about ES6 or ES 2015, or I guess not ES, ECMAScript 2015, otherwise known as ES6 this evening. And like the ECMAScript says, it was finalized in June of 2015, hence ECMAScript 2015. That's when the cadence of the ECMAScript standard now, every June they finalize a new version. Some are larger and produce more changes than others. But ECMAScript 2015 was one that people feel is, a pretty, introduced a lot of new things. It didn't break a lot of things. I wouldn't say it changed a lot of things, but introduced a lot of new things. And now let's see where we're at with, let's see, maybe can I use ES6? Looks like we're something like ES6 classes. We're at about 88% adoption in the world and 92% in the US. So ES6 things, ES6 generators are higher in the global, lower in the US, but looks like most of the ES6 adoption is about 90%. So template literals are a big one, are let. Okay, so looks like that's a pretty strong adoption. One thing to always keep in mind when using things like newer standards is who your target market is. So depending on what your requirements are for what browsers you support, if IE, Internet Explorer, is in your requirements, you're always going to have challenges, and that's just part of what it is. IE is just in a lot of systems because it comes with Windows, and that's just how it goes. We don't think about a lot of the places that it can pop up because typically as developers, we use the newest and the greatest all the time. And we don't think about the fact that, there's 1,000 computers on carts in a hospital that are, locked down by security to stay exactly where they are forever in that type of system. And if we're developing something that's going to show up in that browser, if we were to have a job like that, then we have to deal with that. So it's just something to keep in mind, that browser adoption is one of those things that we have to keep in mind. ECMAScript 5 is the predecessor, ECMAScript 5. It changed from ECMAScript 5 to the year with ES6. And this is typically, you can just integrate into your build something that'll polyfill or change your code to be ES5 compatible, and then you have much higher adoption rate. So you can write in the latest and greatest, and when you actually ship the code, your JavaScript, it'll pop out in ECMAScript 5 and run almost anywhere. So that's kind of the happy medium for everybody. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to look at some of the new things that were added. So first thing that we'll look at, and I don't even know if I'm going to run anything over here this evening, but we'll keep that open for now, is arrow functions. And the way I'm going to go through this is I'm going to write something in ES5 and then show the equivalent in ES6 so we can see the differences and how it's used and kind of compare and contrast. So let me write, actually, let's see. Probably a better, a better order is variable declaration, because variable declaration, then we'll go to arrow functions, then we'll move into everything else because they're going to kind of use both of these. So variable declaration in ES5 was always var, and var x or var y equals 5. All we had was var. And it's a completely different talk, but var and now our ES6 variable declarations handle hoisting differently, also handle their declaration and assignment differently, and won't dive too deep into that, but ES6 is different, so we can declare variables now using const and let. And let is like a new var. It doesn't change too much. One of the differences is that it's block scoped, unlike var, which was function scoped. And variables declared with let can be reassigned just like variables declared with var could. However, let's look at some code. Let's say we had a function, a lowercase function, and calculate salary of a job, and income equals 5. Let's say if job income equals 50, we're going to do some odd things in here. Equals 500. Income equals 5,000. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong spot. And then in the right spot, return income. What's it saying? Yeah, we got that. Oh, console log, calculate salary with a true in here. Okay, it's a lot of code to illustrate something. And in this code here, because var is function scoped, the blocks are going to have no effect on the var. And our end result will be 5,000. We see we get 5,000 here. Now, if we did the same thing using let, let's change these vars to let, and that's why we had the warnings, because of what was going on. So we can use var and let alongside each other. var is still available to us in ES6, but with this, when we run this code, the value is 5. And that's because the if block also has this let. It has nothing to do with the var. So these lets are block scoped. So this variable of income is only available inside this block. And this one is only available inside this block, and this one, and so forth and so on. So when we return the income, this is not seeing any of these income variables. It's only looking for income inside this block, and we pull out this var. Now, const is a fixed read-only identifier, and its variable cannot be reassigned. So if we were to say const equals 7, const and run this, we see the variable 7. And that's because just like let, const is block scoped. So one thing about const and let is they are more expensive than var because they specify whether we plan to change the value of a variable or not. Or not expensive, expressive, sorry. And aside from being that, they're also scoped. So they can't be used inside of an if branch or a for loop and can only be accessed inside of them. So there are some small, well, I guess not small, but subtle differences between them and how they work. But that's one new feature in ECMAScript 2015, ES6. And now I want to look at the arrow function, because when we refactor our function, we're going to use these new variable declarations. So I think that's a better use. So let's build this out a function real quick. And string to lowercase, return a function, console log, this string. And then let's, it's telling me I need one there too. Oh, why not? String lowercase, call string JavaScript. And we'll make it an iffy. There, just to get rid of it. So an arrow function is going to be a preferred way of writing functions in ES6. So we have this function that's going to take a string and lowercase it, as we see here. So when we change this to ES6, or not ES6 specifically, but when we change this to use the new arrow function, we can refactor this. And first thing, we can get rid of this line, this line 2, this where we assign the this to this. And that's because it's no longer needed, because arrow functions are going to bind to the correct context. So this is done for us with an arrow function. So that's one step. And then in our return here, this is where our refactor is going to happen to an arrow function. And we can pull this back. And this as well. We can call this a const. And yeah, there we go. So it's still possible to use function from ES5. Let me drop this down one spot. There we go. With an arrow function. So once again, we're not losing what we had before. These aren't 100% replacements. These are new features that we can use with the things that we had before in JavaScript. And when an arrow function is used with one line statement, it implicitly returns the result of that single statement. So we got to chop off our return as well. For situations with more than one line, however, we will have to return explicitly. So let's run this real quick. We see we still get our lowercase JavaScript. So let's look at that multi-line. Let's say we have a say hello, which is a function. Return hello. And then we can say, let's say, hello, return hello. And it's going to yell because these are already defined, but all three of these are going to be the exact same thing. So we could run these independently. Let's run that one. Well, not console logging it. Return console. I guess I'd have to console log, say hello. Put that down here and throw the E on there. Now we get function. Okay. Not gonna worry about it. But these three are exactly the same. They all will return the string. Hello. So something that.
But don't they suggest that not, I mean, a lot of the things that I've read, they say don't use var anymore, basically.
So there are some people who would say never use var again. And I can see going both ways on it. So I can see that you could probably write all of your code and never use var again and be just fine. However, because of how they're hoisted differently and declared and initialized differently, and the restrictions around that between let, const, and var, I think there are instances where var makes sense. And knowing that difference and when to use which is a valuable skill for a developer to have. I don't think it's something that, it is definitely one of the more subtle and intricate things, and I don't think it's a requirement. But the fact that like that larger block was showing, those variables can't be accessed outside of those blocks, and maybe you want them to be able to. The only way to do that is going to be with a var, because that's going to scope to the function and be available throughout the entire function, as opposed to the block where it's going to be only inside that block. So it really, I think the argument could be made either way. I don't think that, you know, I guess I'm kind of on the Kyle Simpson train of thought on that one, where he says, you know, just writing off something that's available to you as a black and white rule is never a good thing, so to speak. You know, having a deep enough understanding of the difference so that you have that in your tool belt and can use it is a better approach. So not saying that you might ever really need, well, I think you might need to at some point in time. So remembering that it's there is useful, and understanding the difference. But just saying, you know, never use var again could put you in situations where you need it and it's not even one of those things that you even remember to use because you've written it off. So I guess that's kind of where I sit on that one, just because I've watched one of his lectures and he makes a convincing argument to, you know, understand the differences and have it in your tool belt so that if you ever do need it, it's there, even if you don't need it all the time. But I do know, you know, Luke, one of our instructors, says, you know, no more var. So it's personal preference. There also are a lot of people who say that arrow functions can be confusing, because when you have no arguments, you have empty parentheses. When you have one argument, you put that argument here without parentheses. When you have multiple arguments, they go back into parentheses with commas. And there is some lack of consistency in that, which can throw people off and cause visual stumbling blocks in looking at code, because you could be doing the same thing differently, or doing the same thing and writing it differently. So there are some people who just don't like arrow functions because of that. If they don't have to bind, they're not worried about this and adding that bind in there, then they'll just say, hey, I'm sticking with my functions because they work and they're clear. And I always know their structure is always exactly the same. They always have parentheses. They always have the arguments in there. They're never, you don't leave off the parentheses sometimes and put them on there other times. And yeah, so everybody has their preference, but knowing all the features is always useful. All right.
Right on.
Now, one of the more exciting new features for people who've written a decent amount of JavaScript was promises in ES6. So before promises, everybody had been using callbacks, and you've probably used callbacks and not even realize it if you've written JavaScript by using something like a set timeout, or if you've done a raw XML HTTP request. And basically all browser-based asynchronous functions are callback-based. So something such as a timeout not function is going to be an example of a callback. And while this isn't so bad one level deep, as we continue to add on to this, it gets crazy. So the term callback hell was evolved from having to use callbacks for everything. And when you have to nest them and nest them, nest them, nest them, nest them, they grow ridiculously hard to look at and debug and work with. So now we can write this same thing as and here we'll explicitly call promise. Set timeout, delay 1,000. And here's where we get to start to have fun. We get this then. Okay. And that will give us delay over. There we go. So this then is going to wait. So it's going to say, okay, here's a promise, and we're going to fire off this function. And because it's in a promise, we're going to then get back the promise that something's coming from this function. So this then is going to sit there and say, okay, I'm sitting on a promise. And whenever that comes back, I trust that something's going to come, and then I'm going to do my thing. And really, while we don't see it in this one function by itself, what this is useful for is this stops the JavaScript from blocking. So that promise could take a while to come back. If it was something, it could be a delay of 10 seconds. And if so, the JavaScript code is going to sit here and wait, but it's going to let the code that's below it continue to run. So if there's other things that are going on, if there's other functions, it's going to hit here, it's going to start this promise and then say, okay, I'm waiting on a promise, but I've got the promise something's coming, so now I need to keep on going and doing my thing. And then whenever it comes back, then the code will continue running here. So it's kind of like this gets held for whatever comes back from this promise, and then any other code keeps on running in the code. So that's where the promise becomes very useful. And we don't have to implement it through callbacks anymore. Oh, 10 seconds. So it's taking a second. There it is. Now, we could even simplify this more by implementing an arrow function here. So we turn that into an arrow. This becomes an arrow. We can even reduce some of these lines down. Something like this. Let's see. There we go. And that'll have the same functionality as what we had before. Now, where these become really useful is when we're acquiring more logic inside of our functions. And that's because we can continue to tack on these thens. And they're just going to be waiting for whatever is coming from the previous function. And we end our promise with the semicolon, but we don't put it on before the then calls. Something else that we got introduced to us in, well, something else about promises is now there is async await, which I won't talk about, but I know is out there, which is a cool, even further push of making these types of things where you run some code and wait for something to come back, or have, you know, a delay of some sort, whether it's hidden in an API, and then run some more code, and then you might have to wait again and run some more code and such. And it's even getting more simplified. Maybe not more simplified, but even more straightforward. Let's see where maybe it's await. Async functions. 85% right now, global. So might be a little low for using them, you know, just straight up in the browser, but through some compiling and, you know, working it back to ES5, you can write in them, which would be nice. Can't remember TC39. I think that was ES7 where that came in. So this was kind of a, I remember when ES6 came out, they said there's promises now, but async await is coming. And it was like, they were already trying to improve on this, or just didn't get to that point, I guess. So they had something in the interim. Something else that is now added in ES6 is multi-line strings. So in ES5, we had to add a backslash at the end of each line to tell the JavaScript engine that the string would continue in the next line. So something like, and so on and so forth. So now in ES6, we can simply use backtips in our code. And that will be multi-line if need be, the way it's structured. Now, we can also explicitly create multi-line strings in ES6 with this. It's yelling about that. In ES6 with these backticks, and it's as simple as just putting stuff on a new line. And that string will end up like that. We also get our addition of variable interpolation, string interpolation. So we can say my name equals Sam. We can add that right in here. The $ and curly braces, and then our variable. And that's our template string. String interpolation is kind of what I got used to calling it, but it's a template string and that's what it's called if you're ever looking for documentation on it. String literal is also, I think, how MDM calls it. Another very useful tool that saves us a lot of time in coding is destructuring assignment in ES6. So it's going to let us extract multiple values from data stored in objects and arrays. So here's an example of how we would do some destructuring in ES5 if we had, jQuery, grabbing a menu, spot, food. I could say fish equals data.fish and meat equals data.meat. And that's coming off of that jQuery selector and the function. Or if we were to look at something that might be more familiar in Node, we might have some sort of middleware that we're requiring in another file, and then we want to get the username and password from that. So we got request body username. So ES5. In ES6, we can do this much simpler and easier. So we'd grab that just like that. That would assign these fish and meat to those properties of the data that was brought back from this function. Oh. So because these are just properties of this data, or you could say, yeah, we don't have to define data dot at all because they're going to be equal to themselves. So for our middleware example, This would be our equivalent in ES6. We're getting this JSON from JSON middleware, or we're setting that to JSON middleware. So here we've got a required body parser instead of calling the JSON on it. That's what is here. So that's like getting that property and then assigning it to the JSON middleware variable. And then to get our username password, in this example, we just have it like that. Now these can get kind of crazy depending on how large your object is, or maybe some JSON that gets returned to you. I've had like 30 of them getting destructured like that, and it can get hard to parse if you have that many things coming off of an object. But I think that's more in just the structure of the application. So I've sometimes like broken these into multiple lines and still had them coming off of the same thing being destructured just to see. This also works in React Props. So you might have a prop coming in. So instead of sending up something like this.props.username, if you put, so let's say, instead of putting the props into your component, you could put the destructured object. And then you just, this is set for you. And all you have to do is use username in your JSX. So that's outside of kind of this lecture, but there's something cool that you could use to do, which can also get really, really long and then just kind of not be as effective in looking at your code. So object literals also have had some things added to them. And we can set the prototype on object construction. We have a shorthand method for declarations. We can make supercalls and computed property names. So let's look at a typical ES5 object literal. Here's learn code. Sounds like a good example. Not spaces. Port, URL, get accounts, say toString, function, return JSON.stringify, stringify. Don't get too hung up on what's going on here if it doesn't look familiar to you. Just really on how things will change. And let's say this .port. One, two, three, get accounts. Dimensional intents dot song. Oh, comma. There. Right? Comma. It's missing. This one, open, close, open, close. It should be fine. I don't know why it's yelling right now. Okay, either way. So this same object literal in ES6 will have shorthands for the assignment. So let's get this. Just call it object this time. String return JSON stringify super dot value of comma this one be the same. And then value of get accounts join console log manage object. This was definitely probably the most advanced example that we'll go through. Const. Oh, there shouldn't be a there. And we're wanting that. So here we'll have a shorthand for the assignment of get accounts. And we also set our prototype right here in this proto property. Whereas before, we didn't do that. And we can also, like we did, invoke super here. And with that, we have dynamic keys for this value of 1, 2, 3. And this is one of those examples that's really even a little bit out there for anything I've ever seen or done, but has some good, useful things in there to at least have heard of, even if they don't click right now. So a few more things, and we'll be done for this evening, but we can now set default parameters in ES6. So in the past, we would have to do something like model, color, car, and we'd say model equals model or specific, or color equals color blue, or car equals car or Honda. Oh, that's not supposed to be there. What's it saying? Missing semicolon. And it's already defined. It's not really defined. These are arguments. So in ES6, instead of using the logic or in our default parameters, we can put the default values right in the signature of the functions. So you can take this and get rid of all of this and just say model equals civic color equals blue. That's going to assign the default for us, if there isn't one provided. That's similar to other languages, whether it be Ruby or SAS. SAS even has default parameters like that. Something that we've already seen a little bit of, but ES6 introduced template literals, which allow us to output variables in the string. In ES5, we had to use inverted commas to create template literals, single ticks, I guess maybe not ticks, single quote things. So we would have like x equals 10, y equals 20, consolo. I wonder if I could write something that you had to do consolo to make it work. 30 is plus x plus y. You got our 30. Oh. Boop. There. Now we can just do console log, and we use our backtick. Say 30 is $x plus y. See, we get the same thing. So we can do any of our JavaScript inside of this, not just strings. We go through one more of the probably most used things in ES6. Yeah. And that's classes in ES6. So creating classes and using them was difficult in ES5 because of JavaScript's prototypical-based language structure. And ES6 classes solve all of that by using prototypes. However, they're really just syntactical sugar over what's going on. So if we do garage, we can have our constructor, and let's say price with the default and mileage with the default. And then we can set up our constructor with its values. Say Ford, Mustang, blue, mileage, and we can set class methods in here. Car model. So we now have our constructor here, And we can set some defaults, and then we can pass in values, and they'll be set for us on this class car garage, or objects of this class. And we use default parameter values for price and mileage, and method names don't need to have the word function or the colon anymore. We can't assign the property this.model the same way as methods meaning methods. So meaning we can't say at the same indentation level as a method. To set the value of a property, we simply assign a value in the instructor, or the constructor, sorry. And then if we wanted another class to inherit from garage, we now have this extends keyword, so we can say class car dealership extends car garage, and we can have a constructor in there, and this can have price mileage, and we can use super, and that calls the parent constructor. So we can pass in something to the parent constructor. So that's filling in this price and mileage for the car garage constructor. And then we could have our own for this car dealership and say something like this equals and it's much easier than having to create new classes and add to the prototypes. It's under the hood, it's still doing all that stuff for us. It's just much easier and nicer and straightforward and easier to code for sure. Dealership, we can call it that. Here, let's run this, and we can run these functions in here. Should be able to at least. Say car sale dot get car model Mustang, and then console log. Let's say data is price and mileage should return to us. No, okay. I probably need that in here. Either way, classes are being adapted all over the place, especially in libraries, because they allow us to use things. They can tack on the functions that they want us to use for the classes. React is all about this class structure. As soon as it was out, they were using it all over the place. And yeah, that's a lot of the new things that have come out with ES6. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned some things, and going forth to use ES6. There's a bunch more stuff. ES6, I think it was, might be features.org. Yeah, ES6-features.org. That has all of them. So it's a pretty decent list, but it has nice examples. So if you really want to dive into everything that's come out, that's where to go.